The thunder rumbled across the Montana sky as Hannah Wright huddled beneath the inadequate shelter of a lightning-struck oak. Her wedding dress, once pristine white, now mudded and torn at the hem. Rain pelted down mercilessly, each droplet feeling like a bitter reminder of her abandonment at the altar not 2 hours before. The year was 1875, and Hannah had just experienced the most humiliating moment of her 19 years of life. Her fiancé, Thomas Caldwell, had left her waiting at the small church in Silver Creek, only to send his younger brother with a hastily scrawled note explaining he'd run off with the milliner's daughter. Hannah had fled in shame, unable to face the pitying stares of the townsfolk who had gathered to witness what should have been the happiest day of her life. Now miles from town with darkness falling, Hannah shivered violently as the wind picked up. The decision to run had been impulsive, fueled by heartbreak and humiliation. She'd taken nothing but the clothes on her back, an elaborate wedding gown wholly unsuited for the rugged Montana wilderness. "Mighty strange place for a lady in a wedding dress," a deep voice called out over the rain's steady drum. Hannah startled, pressing herself against the tree trunk as a tall figure on horseback approached through the downpour. The man guided his horse closer, and through the rain, she made out the silhouette of a wide-brimmed hat and broad shoulders beneath a long duster coat. "I'm not looking for trouble," Hannah called out, her voice quavering. "Please just ride on." The rider dismounted with practiced ease, leading his horse closer. "No decent man would leave a woman alone in this weather, miss." He stepped into the meager shelter of the tree, and Hannah saw his face for the first time, weather-beaten but handsome, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. He couldn't have been more than 25. "Name's Dalton Yates," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "I reckon you're a fair way from where you're meant to be." Hannah lifted her chin, trying to maintain what little dignity she had left. "That makes two of us. I'm exactly where I should be, away from Silver Creek and everyone in it." Dalton studied her for a long moment, taking in the bedraggled wedding dress and the determined set of her jaw. Without a word, he unbuttoned his long duster coat and slipped it from his shoulders, draping it gently around her trembling form. "Looks to me like you've had yourself a rough day, miss." "Right, Hannah Wright." She clutched the coat around her shoulders, the warmth of it and the faint scent of leather, tobacco, and horse providing an unexpected comfort. "Though it seems inappropriate to accept a coat from a stranger." A smile tugged at Dalton's lips. "Well, Miss Wright, we ain't strangers now that we've been properly introduced. And I reckon propriety took a holiday when you decided to wander these hills in a wedding dress during a thunderstorm." Despite herself, Hannah felt the corners of her mouth twitch. "I suppose you have a point there, Mr. Yates." The rain showed no signs of letting up as night began to fall in earnest. Dalton glanced at the darkening sky. "My cabin's about 2 miles north of here. It ain't much, but it's dry and there's a fire. You can wait out the storm, get yourself sorted." Hannah hesitated, weighing her options. Going back to town was unthinkable. Staying here meant certain illness, if not worse. "I give you my word as a gentleman, Miss Wright, you'll come to no harm under my roof." There was something in his steady gaze that made Hannah believe him. She nodded slowly. "I accept your offer, Mr. Yates, thank you." Dalton helped her onto his horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding, before climbing up behind her. As they rode through the rain, Hannah found herself leaning back against his solid warmth, exhaustion beginning to overwhelm her. Dalton's cabin appeared through the rain as a small, sturdy structure nestled against the side of a hill. A curl of smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting someone was home. "My younger brother keeps the fire going when I'm out," Dalton explained, helping Hannah dismount. "He's a good kid. 16, but with the sense of a man twice his age." Inside, the cabin was simple but well maintained. A young man with the same strong features as Dalton looked up from where he'd been whittling by the fire, his eyes widening at the sight of Hannah in her mudded wedding dress. "Jacob, this is Miss Wright. She'll be staying with us until the weather clears," Dalton explained, hanging his hat on a peg. "Miss Wright, my brother Jacob." Jacob scrambled to his feet, nodding respectfully. "Madam." "I'll need to tend to Samson," Dalton said, referring to his horse. "Jacob, why don't you show Miss Wright where she can dry off and find her something warm to wear?" While Dalton went back out into the rain, Jacob awkwardly led Hannah to a small side room. "Ain't much, but it's private," he said, pulling out a wooden trunk from which he produced a flannel shirt and woolen trousers that would clearly swallow her whole. "These are some of Dal's old things. They'll be big, but they're dry." "Thank you, Jacob." Hannah accepted the clothes gratefully. "Your brother is very kind to help a stranger," Jacob smiled. "That's just Dal for you. Always picking up strays, injured animals, lost travelers. Says it's what our pa would have done." Once alone, Hannah peeled off her sodden wedding dress, wincing as the cold fabric clung to her skin. The memory of Thomas's betrayal stung fresh again, but she pushed it aside. Self-pity would not serve her now. Dalton's clothes were indeed several sizes too large, but the warmth of the dry fabric was worth looking ridiculous. She rolled up the sleeves and pant legs, cinching the waist with a piece of rope that had been left atop the trunk. When she emerged, Dalton had returned from the stable, shaking rain from his hair. He stopped short at the sight of her, and for a moment, Hannah felt acutely self-conscious in the borrowed clothes. "There's hot coffee," he said finally, gesturing to the pot on the stove. "And Jacob's making stew." Over a simple meal of rabbit stew and cornbread, Hannah found herself telling the Yates brothers her story about Thomas, the wedding that wasn't, and her impulsive flight from town. "So you were just going to walk all the way to—" "Where exactly?" Dalton asked, refilling her coffee cup. Hannah stared into the steaming liquid. "I hadn't thought that far ahead. Away from Silver Creek, I suppose. I have an aunt in Denver." "Denver's a mighty long walk in a wedding dress," Dalton observed dryly. "I was upset. People don't always think clearly when they're heartbroken." Dalton's expression softened. "No, I reckon they don't." Later, as Jacob prepared for bed in the loft and Dalton made up a pallet near the fire for Hannah, she watched him move about the cabin with easy efficiency. "Why did you stop for me?" she asked suddenly. Most men would have ridden right past. Dalton paused, considering her question. "My mother died when I was 14, caught in a storm much like this one. No one stopped to help her." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Hannah heard the old pain beneath the words. "I promised myself I'd never pass by someone who needed help, especially not in a storm." Hannah's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "I'm sorry about your mother." Dalton nodded, then changed the subject. "Tomorrow, if the rain lets up, I can take you to the stage stop." "Get you on your way to Denver." Hannah nodded, though the thought of leaving brought an unexpected pang of reluctance. "That would be kind. Thank you." Morning brought clear skies but muddy roads. Dalton announced that the nearby creek would be swollen past safe crossing for at least a day. "Looks like you're stuck with us a bit longer, Miss Wright," he said over breakfast. Jacob brightened. "You could help with the garden. The beans need picking something fierce." Hannah found herself smiling at the boy's enthusiasm. "I'd be happy to help." "It's the least I can do for your hospitality." The day passed in a pleasant rhythm of chores. Hannah discovered that working alongside Dalton and Jacob eased her heartache. There was something healing in the simple tasks: picking beans, feeding chickens, helping prepare meals. By the third day, when Dalton declared the roads passable, Hannah had settled into a comfortable routine at the cabin. She'd learned that Dalton had raised Jacob since their father died 5 years earlier, that he broke horses for ranchers across the territory, and that despite his rugged exterior, he had a collection of dog-eared books that would put some city libraries to shame. "I can take you to the stage stop tomorrow," Dalton said that evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Hannah nodded, though the prospect of leaving filled her with a strange sadness. "You've been very kind, Mr. Yates, both of you." "Dalton," he corrected gently. "After all this time, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Dalton," she agreed, liking the way his name felt on her lips. They sat in companionable silence until he spoke again. "What will you do in Denver?" Hannah sighed. "My aunt runs a boarding house. She'll give me work, I expect. It's not what I planned for my life, but then again, nothing has turned out as planned lately." "And what did you plan?" The question was simple, but it made Hannah pause. What had she planned beyond marrying Thomas and being a dutiful wife? "I'm not entirely sure anymore," she admitted. "I thought I wanted to be a wife, have a family, but perhaps that was just what was expected of me." Dalton nodded thoughtfully. "My ma used to say that sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as disappointments." "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was," Dalton agreed. "I think she would have liked you." The words, simply stated, warmed Hannah in a way she couldn't quite explain. The journey to the stage stop the next day was filled with a bittersweet tension. Hannah rode behind Dalton on Samson, her arms wrapped around his waist, acutely aware that this might be the last time she would be this close to him. At the small way station, they learned the next stage to Denver wouldn't arrive until the following afternoon. "I can come back for you tomorrow," Dalton offered. Hannah shook her head. "You've already done more than enough. I'll be fine waiting here." The station manager, a grizzled man named Peterson, assured them she could stay in the small room reserved for female travelers. As Dalton prepared to leave, Hannah found herself struggling for words. "I don't know how to thank you properly." "No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Hannah said firmly, "not anyone. What you did taking in a stranger, showing such kindness, it's rare, Dalton." "I won't forget it." Something flickered in his eyes, and for a moment, Hannah thought he might say more. Instead, he simply tipped his hat. "Safe travels to Denver, Miss Wright." She watched him ride away until he was nothing more than a distant figure on the horizon, fighting an unexpected urge to call him back. The way station was clean but sparse, with only Peterson and his wife for company. Hannah spent a restless night in the narrow bed, her thoughts repeatedly returning to the cabin and its occupants. By morning, she had made a decision that surprised even herself. When Mrs. Peterson asked if she wanted breakfast before the stage arrived, Hannah declined. "Actually, I was wondering if there might be work in town. Silver Creek, I mean." Mrs. Peterson raised an eyebrow. "Thought you were bound for Denver?" "I've reconsidered. Sometimes the path forward isn't the one that takes you farthest away." The older woman smiled knowingly. "Town's always looking for a schoolteacher. Last one married and moved to Oregon 2 months ago." Hannah's heart lifted. She had always loved children and had completed enough schooling to qualify as a teacher. "Is it far to walk?" "To Silver Creek, about 5 miles south." Mrs. Peterson frowned. "Though I wouldn't recommend walking alone." As if summoned by her thoughts, the sound of hoofbeats approached. Hannah turned to see Dalton riding toward the station, and her heart gave a peculiar leap. He dismounted, looking somewhat sheepish as he approached. "I was thinking," he began without preamble, "that Denver's an awful long way to go when there might be opportunities closer to hand." Hannah couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. "I was just having the same thought." Surprise and something that looked like hope flickered across Dalton's features. "Were you now?" "Mrs. Peterson says Silver Creek needs a teacher. I was considering applying." "It's a good town," Dalton said cautiously, "despite your experience with certain individuals." Hannah nodded, thinking of Thomas with a pang that was more indignation than heartbreak now. "I'm beginning to think that experience led me exactly where I needed to be, caught in a rainstorm under an oak tree." Dalton's slow smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Funny how things work out that way." The next weeks brought significant changes to Hannah's life. She secured the teaching position in Silver Creek and found lodging with an elderly widow named Mrs. Holbrook, who was delighted to have company and help around her large house. The townsfolk were initially curious about the jilted bride's return, but Hannah carried herself with such quiet dignity that gossip quickly gave way to respect, especially as she proved herself a dedicated and capable teacher. And then there was Dalton. He found reasons to come to town more frequently than he ever had before, supplies that couldn't wait, mail that suddenly needed collecting, a horse that required the blacksmith's immediate attention. Each visit included stopping by the schoolhouse or Mrs. Holbrook's garden, where Hannah often worked in the evenings. Their friendship deepened as summer turned to fall. Hannah found herself looking forward to his visits, planning what stories she would tell him about her students or which book they might discuss next. Dalton had begun bringing her volumes from his collection, Emerson, Whitman, and her favorite, Jane Austen. On a crisp October afternoon, Hannah was dismissing her students when she spotted Dalton waiting outside, leaning against the hitching post with Samson grazing nearby. "Mr. Yates," she greeted him formally, aware of the curious eyes of her departing students. "What brings you to town today?" "Thought I might accompany you on a walk, Miss Wright, if you're amenable," he replied, matching her formality with a twinkle in his eye. Once the last child had disappeared down the street, Dalton offered his arm. "Jacob's staying with friends in town tonight. Thought you might like to have dinner at the cabin. I've been practicing my cooking." Hannah raised an eyebrow. "Have you indeed, and what culinary delights await?" "Venison stew that won't poison you, fresh bread that's only slightly burned on the bottom, and Mrs. Holbrook's apple pie that she kindly donated to the cause when I explained my intentions." "And what intentions are those?" Hannah asked, her heart beating faster. Dalton's expression grew serious. "To court you properly, Hannah Wright, if you'll allow it," joy bubbled up inside her. "I believe I would allow that, Dalton Yates." The months that followed were filled with courtship traditions both old and new. Dalton escorted Hannah to the town's harvest festival, where they danced until her feet ached pleasantly. They took Sunday rides into the hills, sometimes with Jacob as chaperone, sometimes with Mrs. Holbrook's blessing to go alone. Hannah discovered that the man who had seemed so self-sufficient actually valued her opinions deeply, asking her thoughts on everything from cattle breeding to poetry. She found herself falling in love not with dramatic gestures or pretty words, but with the steady, dependable way he showed up for her, for Jacob, for anyone who needed him. Winter brought heavy snows that often made travel between town and the Yates cabin difficult. On Christmas Eve, Dalton arrived unexpectedly at Mrs. Holbrook's door, his hat and shoulders dusted with snow. "Didn't want you to spend Christmas alone," he explained, stomping snow from his boots. "Jacob's setting up the sleigh." Mrs. Holbrook, who had grown quite fond of Dalton, practically pushed Hannah toward the door. "Go, child. Don't keep that boy waiting in the cold." The sleigh ride through the snow-covered landscape was magical, with stars bright overhead and a wool blanket wrapped around them both. Jacob chatted excitedly about the Christmas preparations at the cabin, including a surprise he refused to divulge despite Hannah's teasing. The surprise turned out to be a small pine tree set up in the corner of the cabin, decorated with carved wooden ornaments, dried berries, and ribbon. "Jacob made most of the ornaments," Dalton explained as Hannah admired them. "He's been working on them for weeks." "They're beautiful," Hannah told the boy, who blushed with pleasure. After a dinner that proved Dalton's cooking skills had indeed improved, they exchanged simple gifts by firelight: a hand-knitted scarf for Jacob from Hannah, a set of carved chess pieces from Jacob to Dalton, a leather-bound journal from Dalton to Hannah. "I have something else for you," Dalton said quietly as Jacob nodded off by the fire. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. It was my mother's. Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, was a simple gold ring set with a small pearl. "I'm not asking yet," Dalton said quickly, seeing Hannah's wide eyes. "It's too soon, I know that, but I wanted you to have this as a promise, that when you're ready, if you ever are, I'll be waiting." Hannah touched the ring gently. "It's beautiful, Dalton. Like you," he said simply. "I never thought I'd find someone who fits into my life the way you do, Hannah. Someone who understands that my responsibilities to Jacob come first, who doesn't mind the simplicity of this life." "I love this life," Hannah said honestly. "I love the cabin and Jacob and," she paused, gathering her courage. "And I love you, Dalton Yates." It was the first time either of them had spoken the words aloud. Dalton's face softened as he took her hands in his. "I love you too, Hannah Wright. Have since I found you under that oak tree, looking like a half-drowned angel in that wedding dress." Spring arrived with wildflowers dotting the hills, and a proposal delivered on bended knee beside the same lightning-struck oak where they had first met. Hannah, wearing Dalton's mother's ring, said yes without hesitation. The wedding was held in early June in Silver Creek's small church, the same one where Hannah had once been left waiting. This time, however, the groom stood steadfast at the altar, his eyes never leaving hers as she walked down the aisle. Jacob served as best man, standing proud in his new suit. Mrs. Holbrook wept happy tears from the front pew. Even Thomas Caldwell and his wife attended, though Hannah barely noticed them. Her attention focused entirely on the man waiting for her. Dalton had expanded the cabin in preparation for Hannah's arrival, adding a proper bedroom and enlarging the kitchen. On their wedding night, as he carried her across the threshold, Hannah felt a sense of rightness that told her she was exactly where she belonged. "Welcome home, Mrs. Yates," Dalton whispered against her hair. "I've been home since the moment you put your coat over my shoulders in the rain," Hannah replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. Their life together wasn't always easy. There were harsh winters when food grew scarce, summers of drought that threatened the small herd of cattle Dalton had begun to build, and the constant challenges of frontier life. Yet they faced each difficulty together, their bond strengthening with every obstacle overcome. Jacob grew into a fine young man under their combined guidance, eventually striking out on his own to apprentice with Silver Creek's blacksmith. Hannah continued teaching until the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Marie after Dalton's mother. 2 sons followed William and Joseph, filling the expanded cabin with laughter and childish squabbles. Hannah started a small school in their home for neighboring children too far from town to attend regularly. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Dalton took Hannah's hand in his. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Not going to Denver, staying here instead?" Hannah looked at him, this man who had found her at her lowest moment and seen not a bedraggled, abandoned bride but a woman worth cherishing. "Never," she said firmly. "Thomas doing what he did was the best thing that ever happened to me, though I couldn't see it at the time. It led me to you." Dalton squeezed her hand. "Sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as disappointments. Your mother really was a wise woman," Hannah said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "She would have loved you," Dalton murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Almost as much as I do." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Hannah thought about the journey that had brought her here from a rain-soaked wedding dress to this moment of perfect contentment. Life had not turned out as she had once planned, but it had given her something far better than she could have imagined. And it had all begun with a storm, a chance encounter, and the simple kindness of a coat placed around her shoulders. 10 years later, the Yates Ranch had grown into one of the more prosperous properties in the area. Hannah and Dalton had added a second story to the original cabin, their family having expanded to include a 4th child, another daughter named Elizabeth. Jacob had married the blacksmith's daughter and built a home on the adjacent property, keeping the family close while establishing his independence. His skills as a blacksmith had become renowned throughout the territory. On the anniversary of the day they met, Dalton and Hannah always took a ride to the lightning-struck oak. The tree had survived and thrived despite its injury, much like Hannah herself had done after her own storm. "I found something in town yesterday," Dalton said as they dismounted by the tree. From his saddlebag, he produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. Hannah unwrapped it carefully to reveal a book of poetry. "Elizabeth Barrett Browning," she read, tracing the embossed cover. "Open it," Dalton urged. Inside, he had marked a passage with a pressed wildflower. Hannah read aloud, "How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach. Her voice faltered as emotion overcame her. After all these years, this man still found ways to surprise her with his thoughtfulness. I may not have fancy words like that, Dalton said, taking her hand, but I reckon that's how I feel about you, Hannah Yates, more every day. Hannah closed the book and leaned into his embrace. We've built something beautiful here, haven't we? We have, Dalton agreed, looking out over the valley where their home stood, smoke curling from the chimney, their children visible as tiny figures in the distance. And to think it all started because of a rainstorm and a wedding that wasn't meant to be. Hannah smiled, remembering the desperate young woman she had once been. I think it was meant to be exactly as it happened. Every rain-soaked, heartbroken moment led me right where I needed to be. As they rode back toward home, side by side as they had been for the past decade, Hannah reflected on how a moment of despair had transformed into a lifetime of joy. The coat Dalton had placed around her shoulders that stormy day had been more than a gesture of kindness. It had been the first thread in the tapestry of their shared life, a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined when she fled down the church steps in her mudded wedding gown. Some blessings, indeed, came disguised as disappointments. But love, real love, came exactly when and how it was needed most, often in the most unexpected ways.